A lot of people know who you are. A few more than that don't know who you are in the world of 8 billion people. So um, I know you from going back over 40 years, from when we
That's
were
crazy. It was. I was
fellow
thinking about this, 1985, right? The summer of '85.
June 30th of 85, right? First day of our 5-week summer program, the National High School Institute at Northwestern. We were known as Cherubs, and we got to be friends then. And then we conspired to become roommates when we both got accepted to Northwestern. And you survived a year of being a roommate of mine, which I'm waiting for the book still to come out on that.
Barely
So
survived,
thanks
but I did make
for
it
holding
through.
off.
Yeah, I made it through.
It built your character. It builds character being
Exactly
my
right. If it
roommate.
doesn't kill
And
you, it makes you
so
stronger. Right.
yeah, and fortunately, you got through that, and so, and that's not the main reason why you're on, but that's kind of a fun little backdrop is that we've known each other for so long and we're friends, and though I know that you're a reader of my Substack, and you have a Substack that I enjoy very much. I'm a subscriber to called Extra Innings, and we'll touch on that later. We're also going to talk a little bit about just your career as in baseball, all the way through into the major leagues with different teams, and then more recently some new developments. So if you could, just take us back to the beginning and just what prompted you to initially get into this whole realm of broadcasting. What was the earliest signs of a young Glenn Geffner
Well, I
being
grew up, I'm
interested in
sure,
radio?
very much the way you did, passionate about sports. And from a very young age, I fell in love with baseball. As somebody who's never been the biggest person in his age group, it was the one sport that I played growing up. Not very well, but I did play it. Uh, Read everything I could, learned everything I could. I fell in love with reading by reading about baseball. My parents wanted me to read, so they subscribed me to Sports Illustrated. My dad introduced me to the box scores, and I fell in love with baseball at a young age. Growing up in South Florida, though, we didn't have Major League Baseball in the 1970s and into the 1980s. We had college baseball at the University of Miami, where I went to baseball camp every summer and where I later worked at the baseball camp. But I would sit from the time I was 7, 8 years old in my bedroom and watch the game of the week on Saturday afternoon on NBC with the volume turned down. And if the Red Sox were playing the Yankees, I'd get out my Red Sox baseball cards and my Yankees baseball cards, and I'd line them up in the order of the batting order. So I'd have statistics in front of me, and I'd broadcast the games from when I was 7, 8 years old on up for a few years. Haven't done it in the last several years, but for a while I did that. Got to high school, and in those days, you didn't have the kind of high school broadcasting opportunities that you have today in so many schools across the country. So I was involved in student journalism, and I wrote for the student newspaper. I began to intern at the Miami Herald during my senior year in high school and continued that through college. And so when I went to Northwestern, when we reunited there in the fall of 1986, broadcasting didn't seem like a real option for me. I wanted to cover Major League Baseball, and I thought writing about Major League Baseball would be the way to do it. So I went to Medill thinking that one day I'd write for Sports Illustrated. I shared your passion for Sports Illustrated. Only one of us, and it wasn't me, had the giant SI above our bed in our freshman year dorm room made out of Sports Illustrated covers. I can still picture that to this day. But my dream
Yeah,
was to follow in the footsteps of so many great names and maybe cover Major League Baseball for Sports Illustrated. But during
yeah.
new student week of freshman year, I saw a sign for auditions at the student radio station. WNUR Sports was auditioning, and I got involved from day one and fell in love with it. And as soon as I had that first opportunity on the air, I knew that that was what I wanted to pursue. So had the chance to do
Yeah.
play-by-play for Northwestern football, men's and women's basketball, baseball. We did talk shows, did all sorts of things, and that was when I really knew this is what I wanted to pursue.
That's great. I was an alternate on WNUR radio twice, and as a freshman. And I don't know if you know this, Glenn, but one of the times was when the Red Sox came back against the Angels in Game 5 of the ALCS in October of '86.
Wow.
And of the 4 minutes that I had, I think I devoted 2.5 minutes to that one game. I was clearly
Only two
in
and
a
a
very
half?
biased and
Only 2.5.
yeah, I was
Well,
restrained.
we'll
I,
get to it later, I'm sure, my time with the Red Sox, but I was in Boston for some very memorable and historic seasons, some high highs and some low lows. but my indoctrination to what it meant to be a Red Sox fan was living with you through the 1986 postseason, and specifically the 1986 World Series. That's the first time I was able to see in the flesh what being a Red Sox fan was really all about. And as I recall, you kind of disappeared for a day, like literally disappeared for a day or two after game 6 of that World Series. And my recollection, I might be wrong, is you didn't even watch game 7 because as a lifelong Red Sox fan, you had a sense of how it was likely to end.
Well, I will say this actually. Here's my recollection. I don't want to say here's what happened because our memories can be fuzzy, but I was one of 4 guys from the Boston area who lived in our dorm in Shepherd, and of the 4 of us, I was the only one that was hopeful, might be the right word, / confident they would win Game 7, and everyone else was like, no, it's over. And the Red Sox went up 3-0 in that Game 7, and they did not hang on. And so anyway, so I did not disappear fully. I probably took a walk that was maybe an hour or two. Probably felt like a day or two. You probably needed that kind of break.
I seriously remember you being gone for a 24-hour period or so. Maybe I'm misremembering, as Roger Clemens, the Red Sox pitcher, said. But I remember you taking it very hard.
Yeah, it was a journey. And so, yeah, I guess 18 years later. So we'll get there in a minute or two about how you intersected with the Red Sox. I thought, how interesting. My roommate, my friend from Miami, gets to have this amazing journey, but you didn't just fall into it. You worked hard. And in fact, talk about, so coming out of college in 1990, and then from there, it wasn't like you skipped all ahead to the Major League Baseball. What was your first job out of college?
I was really lucky. I went to AAA right out of college to Rochester, New York, as an unpaid intern initially with the Rochester Red Wings, who at that time were the AAA affiliate of the Baltimore Orioles. And I had planned to graduate a quarter early to finish up in March rather than in June, so I could get a job in baseball and start before opening day. And that first opportunity was as an unpaid intern in Rochester, New York, where I didn't know a soul. Rochester to me was a line on the back of Cal Ripken's baseball card. That's essentially what I knew about Rochester, and wound up turning that internship where I was paying bills by making mascot appearances, $25 a pop, into a full-time position as the head of PR. And then I transitioned and became the number 2 broadcaster and eventually the lead broadcaster, working with Josh Lewin. Josh was the lead broadcaster when I was the number 2. Josh left for Baltimore. I became the lead broadcaster. Josh, who we went to Northwestern with. So that was right out of school. I went to Rochester and had the time of my life there for 5 years, where I really immersed myself in everything that I was doing. And it was great. And it's one of the things I talk to my students about to this day. There's this negative connotation to paying your dues. We talk a lot about, well, you get out of college, you got to pay your dues and work your way up and climb the ladder. And to me, paying your dues should not have that negative connotation attached to it. I embraced every minute I spent in Rochester. And to this day, many of my closest friends in the world are people I work with in Rochester. My wife is someone I met and worked with in Rochester. So I owe a lot to those 5 years I spent in Rochester, New York. I wouldn't have traded a second those 5 years. And even to the point where I had a couple opportunities to leave Rochester and go to the major leagues, and I stayed because I was so happy in Rochester at that time.
Interesting. I forgot about that, Glenn. And I forgot that Josh Lewin and you were partners there. I knew Josh. He lived in our dorm as well in our freshman year, and I worked with him at Sports Information actually at Northwestern, and he was the broadcaster for the interior of the press box as a freshman, which was a huge deal. And so yeah, he had the broadcasting chops from a very young age. So so you guys are a team. You have a few opportunities to go. Tell me about that. Like, what, if you can, to whatever detail you want to share about which offers you got, and any what ifs that might come from that.
So I started out in Rochester as an unpaid intern doing all the team's public relations. When I became full-time, I was the head of PR, and then I did the PR while also being the number 2 broadcaster, did the PR while also being the lead broadcaster. So my 2 chances to go to the major leagues were as a PR director right out of Rochester. One was to go to the Baltimore Orioles, and then later to go to the San Diego Padres. And I turned them both down Eventually, the little Padres came back to me, and at that point, it felt like it was the right time. It was the end of the 1996 season in Rochester, and I had just gotten engaged, and it felt like the right time to make a move and start a new life. So it worked out. I was fortunate that the same people who I had respectfully declined their opportunity to in the past came back to me multiple times and made San Diego a reality for us. It was a great place to start in the big leagues for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And you were in San Diego for how many years? 5, 6?
For 6 seasons. We got there around Thanksgiving time, 1996, and we were there through the end of 2002. So I was there for my 6 years, began with the last 5 years of Tony Gwynn's career. So I overlapped with Tony at the tail end of his remarkable run. I was there for the pennant season in 1998 when the Padres won the pennant, lost the World Series to that unbelievable Yankees team that won 125 games between the regular season and the postseason. At the end of that year, we had a referendum to pass Proposition C, which led to the public-private partnership that built Petco Park and revitalized downtown San Diego. So I was there for all of that. Was there for the beginning of the construction of Petco Park, but we were still in the old stadium. It was once Jack Murphy, then Qualcomm Stadium, when I left to go to Boston.
Wow. And Jack Murphy, maybe you know this better than I do, Glenn. Sports writer, right?
Right.
Jack Murphy.
He was the
Is that the
sports
only
editor.
stadium named reference?
Right. He was the sports editor at the San Diego Union back in the day, later became the Union Tribune when two papers merged. But Jack Murphy was a big proponent of getting Major League Sports to San Diego. And the Chargers moved from Los Angeles, and the expansion Padres were born in large part because of the efforts of Jack Murphy, who helped get the stadium itself built, knowing that it might attract an NFL team and a Major League team. So he's an icon.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, the 69 Padres who, well, eventually they had, Don Zimmer was the manager. And did they not have John McNamara as well at one point?
At one time, right.
There was a pipeline. So there was like a pipeline in a way for the Red Sox managers. Also became a pipeline for you going from San Diego, your next stop being my hometown, Boston. So talk about how that came about, and then how, because I know you had a hybrid type of situation where you're doing some broadcasting, some more public relations. How did you balance all that? And also, I know you got, like, you had a show, a talk show, or some kind of a video program as
right.
well?
So during my time in San Diego, I was the head of PR initially and had some opportunities to broadcast, filled in on some radio and television broadcasts, doing play-by-play. We created some of our own television programming. I hosted and reported for a daily Padres report show we would do from spring training every day each spring. We would do a weekly Padres report show during the season. So I was involved with that. So that kept my hand in the broadcasting. And in my last year in San Diego, what happened was Larry Lucchino, who had been the president of the Padres, and Charles Steinberg, who was Larry's right-hand man and essentially my mentor, they were the people that brought me from Rochester to San Diego. They left with a large group of Padres employees to go to the Boston Red Sox because Larry was part of the group that bought the Red Sox prior to the 2002 season with John Henry and Tom Werner. And that was when Theo Epstein joined the Red Sox from the Padres, and Mike D, Sam Kennedy, a lot of other names that people might know. And I was invited to be part of that group. We were so happy in San Diego. We said, we appreciate the offer. We're going to stay. We love San Diego. And really, we had our first child by that time and thought we'd be in San Diego forever. But when the president and CEO leaves and gets replaced, and the replacement is an absolute disaster, all of a sudden being in San Diego didn't seem as much fun. In fact, one of the ways the Padres enticed me to stay my last year was to say, hey, we'll put you on the air full time. So my last year in San Diego, I was broadcasting full time, working part of a 3-man radio booth with the Hall of Famer Jerry Coleman and Ted Leitner, who's a Padres Hall of Famer and a legend in San Diego. So I broadcast full time my last year with the Padres. But nonetheless, it was such a miserable year under the new leadership that when the Red Sox came calling again prior to the 2003 season and said, hey, you want to come east now? We were on the first flight to Boston. And so that got us reunited.
Interesting.
A lot of people we had worked with in San Diego, most notably Larry Lucchino and Charles Steinberg. You know, Theo Epstein's the biggest name in the group, but Theo and many others as well.
Interesting. So along the way, I mean, so you're getting so much of a grounding in all of this in terms of knowledge of the overall organization, communications, the radio booth. Was there a certain point where you were trying to get into the booth more, or is that an organic thing? How did that come about,
No, I was,
and how difficult was that for you to prep for both?
well, I was the lead
I'm asking like
broadcaster.
5 questions at a time.
That's okay. I was
I'm
the
breaking
lead
all the rules, man.
broadcaster in AAA. But when I left Rochester to go to San Diego to be the head of PR, I essentially said to myself, okay, you're a PR guy now, and you can't worry about doing something different. You got to immerse yourself in what you're doing. And I did that. And I was true to that pledge. As opportunities presented themselves, I didn't pursue them. They came to me and said, hey, do you want to host this? Do you want to report for this? Do you want to fill in on TV? Do you want to fill in on radio? Sure, I did that stuff. But it was always a little bit awkward being the PR guy who's now doing TV play-by-play, or being the PR guy who's now doing radio play-by-play. Less so in San Diego than down the road when opportunities presented themselves in Boston. Kind of similarly, it happened in an organic way like that. I was the VP of communications with the Red Sox. And then eventually we did the same sort with the same people, the same leadership, the spring training TV show, the weekly Red Sox Report TV show. And again, I had a chance to start filling in on radio broadcasts. Nesson offered me the rights or the opportunity to do their minor league package, where I'd go down to Pawtucket or go to Portland, Maine, or go to Lowell, Mass, and broadcast minor league games on Nesson with the Red Sox affiliates. And that continued to grow and grow. And then again in Boston in my fifth year, 07, they said, how about doing radio full time? So I jumped at the opportunity. And we had won the World Series in 04. Going back, I got to Boston in 03. The first year was the misery of Aaron Boone, the heartbreaking Game 7 against the Yankees in the ALCS, which was really my indoctrination beyond what I knew from you about what it meant to be a Boston Red Sox. The next year, though, was so special because it was through in 03 to come back from 3-0 down to beat the Yankees in the ALCS. I was the head of PR at that point, the VP of communications. We not only came back against the Yankees and swept the Cardinals in the World Series, first World Series win in 86 years, and all that became, imagine being the head of PR for the Red Sox at that time when the Red Sox really were the number one story in sports globally. And I'm talking about working with Barbara Walters and George Stephanopoulos and Queer Eye for the Straight Guy and The Tonight Show and Letterman. It was something that transcended baseball by a mile. And we were on the cover of Time magazine and Newsweek and everything. It was really a remarkable experience, but it was overwhelming. There was so much going on because at that time, in a way, similarly to what the Cubs were able to do in 2016, the Red Sox winning the World Series transcended sports. You didn't have to be a sports fan to understand the magnitude of what that was all about. Right. And I always think back to the Red Sox were Sports Illustrated's Sportsman of the Year when that was a big deal. And Tom Verducci came to Boston to write the story and spent a week or two, I think, in our offices going through all the letters that had been written to the Red Sox by people after the Sox won the World Series, all the tales of what that victory meant to individual people. And then he reported out these stories, and that was the Sportsman of the Year story, and went to the cemeteries that were decorated with pennants and pictures and things like that, and front pages of newspapers where, people had written in about the fact that my grandfather didn't live to see this day and what it means to us to be able to go to his grave and celebrate with him or my father or whatever relative. It was remarkable. It was a very special and unique time, and it was a great thing to be a part of, for sure.
Oh, yeah. And I remember talking to you shortly after that, and because I've written a couple of features over the years for Medill magazine on your journey. But there was the time where after the 19-8 drubbing in Game 3 that the Yankees inflicted on the Red Sox in 04, and you were walking with Tito, the Red Sox manager, right? And I'm sure you recall better than I do, but I have a recollection of what he said to you, or maybe you said something to him. But the optimism at the time, right? Not giving up.
Yeah, for sure. You're exactly right about that. Walking to the interview room with Terry Francona after that game, and as dark as things seemed, certainly on the outside, there was still, for some insane reason, this confidence on the inside. And that was the whole Curt Schilling, why not us thing, and the whole Kevin Millar, don't let us win tonight thing. And that was legit. People really believed that. And, it's funny, though, I can then relate that to in 2007, 3 years later, the Red Sox got to the ALCS against the Indians that year and went down 3-1. And I remember how different it felt because, and I want to make sure I say this correctly. In 2004, there was this feeling that we were every bit as good as the Yankees. We should beat the Yankees. We can hang with the Yankees. We got to get over this hump. In 07, though, there was this feeling that, boy, the Indians they have our number. This Indians team with Sabathia and Hafner and Sizemore and all these guys, they're just loaded. They're really good. They're up 3-1. It'd be really hard to overcome this. And yet the Red Sox came back, won that series, and then swept the Rockies in the World Series. So there were the two big comebacks in the postseason. Everybody remembers 2003, or 2004 rather. But yeah, those were great memories, being on the inside for some of that stuff and seeing some of the things that wound up being written about in books and some of the things that maybe didn't quite make it in the books. Being in the Red Sox clubhouse prior to Game 7 of the ALCS in 04, after the Red Sox had been down 3-0, came back now to force Game 7 in the Bronx, and being in the clubhouse when probably about an hour before the game, Theo Epstein played for the team, a couple of voicemails he had received from a couple of pretty well-known Bostonians who knew a thing or two about an upset, Jim Craig and Mike Eruzione, and the encouraging messages they had sent to Theo that he played for the team. And there were stories that came out about the Jack Daniels shots that night and things like that in the clubhouse. But I choose to remember Jim Craig and Mike Eruzione's pep talks more than the Jack Daniels stuff that Kevin Millar and Johnny Damon, some of those guys talk about. But those are remarkable times, no doubt. And to have had a front row seat for that, to be along for the ride, is certainly something I'll never forget.
Absolutely. Along the way, Glenn, I mean, have you had the temptation, or have anyone prodded you? Hey, you've got a book in you. You've got something, in that way. And how do you walk that line mentally, where in terms of people's confidence, and then would there be a betrayal? And so, to my knowledge, I think I would know you've not written a book, but what are the ethics of that?
Everybody writes books these days. I don't really think there are ethics necessarily, as long as you're telling the truth. I've got a book or more in me, but I don't think it's that book. I don't think it's my journey and the things I learned from Tony Gwynn and Ricky Henderson and Trevor Hoffman in San Diego and things I was a part of in Boston. I'm not precisely sure what it is, but I don't think I'm going to be the one to write that. There have been so many books written about the 2004 Red Sox in the immediate aftermath, and even on various anniversaries. There have been more, and there have been documentaries done about that team, some really good documentaries done about that team. So I don't think it's my place to tell those stories, especially now. It's been so long. Had I carefully documented everything as we were going along day to day, I might have an even better recollection than I do. But I'll let other people tell those stories, and I'll just be glad I was along for the ride.
Yeah, and you could be a source, maybe. You could be just,
maybe.
Maybe
I have been. You never know.
See where that comes. Right. So, touching on a little bit of your career here, I want to move on to the next step, which is where you moved on after Boston, not long after that second World Series win, right? And so, tell me about that, how that came about, and how that was a homecoming of sorts for you.
So I'd actually been offered the Marlins play-by-play job after the 04 season. I knew some people. I grew up in South Florida, obviously, and South Florida always had a special place in my heart. And I was offered the job after the 04 season. We had just won the World Series, and things were pretty cool in Boston. And at that time, I turned it down, which is a crazy thing to think about when I think about my dream of broadcasting Major League Baseball from a young age and everything else going on. We were comfortable in Boston. We were happy in Boston. Our family was getting bigger. We bought a house after that World Series in 04, in part with the World Series share that I got a piece of by being the head of PR for the Red Sox at that time. And it's, you think about little things that mean nothing to anybody else, but mean something to me when players led by Jason Varitek and Trot Nixon have a big team meeting And when you win the World Series, just when you're in the postseason, they divvy up the postseason shares, and players who've been with you all season get a full share, and some people get a partial share. And every now and then they throw a few front office people and people who have been around the team every day, who they feel are a part of what they're doing. And when I found out months after the World Series and I'd been voted a partial share, for me, that was life-changing money at that time. And, a World Series is much to a major league player making millions of dollars a year. But for me, it was the down payment on a house in Lexington, Massachusetts. It was a really big deal. And to this day, I'll never forget Jason Varitek and Trot Nixon and guys like that who led that charge and made that happen, made that possible for me and for my family. So you remember stuff like that. Anyhow, so we stayed in Boston, moved on to Miami. At the end of the 2007 season, by now I've made the full-time move into the Red Sox radio booth and was able to work with Joe Castiglione and call the 2007 World Series win against the Rockies. The Marlins came back to me and said, "What about now? What do you think?" And at that point, we felt as though we were ready to make the move. It was a homecoming for me. South Florida at that point, we had 2 children. We were pregnant with our third. Felt like maybe an easier place to raise our family than New England was from a weather standpoint, from just everything being newer standpoint. We loved New England. We loved Lexington. But it just felt like it was time to make the move. So I came back to Miami and joined the Marlins for the 2008 season and spent 15 years doing the games. The first 10 or so years, a little more than 10 years actually, with Dave Van Horn, who was the lead voice of the Marlins for a long time, had previously been the voice of the Montreal Expos, Hall of Fame broadcaster. I actually have the distinction of having worked with 3 different Hall of Fame broadcasters at 3 stops. Jerry Coleman in San Diego, Joe Castiglione, who just won the Ford Frick Award last year in Boston, and then Dave Van Horn with the Marlins. And when Dave retired, I took over as the lead voice of the Marlins for my final several years with the team. So that's how we got back down here. And it was a crazy move in many people's eyes, leaving the Red Sox at the height of their powers to go to the Marlins. And, for the better chunk of those 15 years, I kind of felt like I was in the witness protection program in baseball, because when you're working for the Red Sox, especially in the years I was there, we were the hub of the baseball universe, and you saw everybody in baseball all the time, and all the lead broadcasters, the network TV people, and the top writers, and everybody. And ESPN was there for every time anybody sneezed. Then you go to the Marlins, and we're kind of working in obscurity a little bit. But you know what? I had a couple of World Series rings. I had been there and done that, and I was happy to be able to be somewhere where basically you can leave your job at the office. In Boston, you could not leave your job at the office. That's how big the Red Sox are. That's how much the Red Sox dominated everything culturally in New England at that time. So it was in some ways a relief to come back and certainly not be in the kind of spotlight we were in Boston, but to have the opportunity to broadcast for my hometown team, to have a lot of fun with it, to have a partner I loved working with, to have a couple of TV broadcasters I loved traveling with, and great relationships. And those were great years. Had a great time for most of those 15 years.
Yeah. I hear that's great. So, and I know I would see you on occasion when you came through town, and we'd have dinner or catch up, and you kindly gave me and my kids a tour of the Marlins Park, which is a great bobblehead collection, I recall.
That's right, the bobblehead museum.
Well. So there's what people see or hear, depending on whether if you're TV or radio, but then there's all the work that goes into being prepared for that. So can you just talk about that, Glenn, about what you developed over the years in terms of being ready once the program began, and so that you could be able to be prepared and cover 3-4 hours overall when you include pregame and postgame?
Pre-pitch clock. I got out just in time, no pitch clock. So I had to really fill 3 hours plus every night. And I did, for the bulk of my time in Miami, I did the pregame show. And for the entirety of my time in Miami, I did the postgame show also. So that was extra time on the front end and back end of the radio broadcasts. But you make a great point. I would tell people all the time, and this would stun them. People think the game starts at 7:10. You show up at 6:30 and broadcast the game. That couldn't be further from the truth. I'd normally be at the ballpark 2:30 prior to a 7 o'clock start. But when the game started at 7:10, that was the easy part of my day. There's, to quote Roger Clemens the second time, the day he pitches is his easy day of the week. It's the 4 days starts, where you're doing all the work to be ready to pitch on that fifth day, that's really the grind. That's the early part of it. And to broadcast at a high level, it's all preparation. The preparation is literally 80-85% of the job. And that preparation is never ending. It's not just you wake up one day and prepare for tonight's game. It's in 2015, remembering a conversation I had with Tony Gwynn in 1999 and being able to apply something Tony Gwynn told me in 1999, or that Tim Wakefield told me about throwing a knuckleball in 2003 to a broadcast in 2015. So I was not one to use game notes and media guides. As a PR person, I had written game notes and media guides for years, but as a broadcaster, I did all of my own preparation every day statistically for both teams because I wanted to bring things to the broadcast that nobody else had. But that's only part of it. The big part is talking to people and being down around the batting cage, in the clubhouse, at the ballpark early, developing relationships and bringing insight to the broadcast, things that nobody else knows. So the manager will sit and talk to the media for 15, 20 minutes at 4:30 every afternoon, but I want to get 5 minutes one-on-one with him. So I'll have other stuff that not everybody else has. I need to bring things to the broadcast every night that you didn't read in the newspaper this morning or see on Twitter this afternoon. I've got to have new, fresh content every night. I wanted people to think I'm going to hear things by listening to the Marlins on the radio that I'm not going to get anywhere else because only Glenn is going to provide this stuff to me. So I took preparation very seriously. And in my new life, which we'll get into in teaching, preparation is a huge part of what I do with my students, because that really is what separates an okay broadcaster from a really good broadcaster. Anybody can sit there and give you a home run call or call a touchdown pass or whatever you want as a broadcaster, but you got to fill 3 hours. You got to fill 4 hours. You got to bring interesting things to the table. And in baseball, you're doing this 162 times a year during the regular season, 162 games, and I think about 180 days. You're in people's living rooms or in their cars or at the beach with them every single day. You got to have fresh material, interesting material. You got to give people a reason to listen. And particularly working for the Marlins, and for most of my years, the team was not very good. You really got to work. You've really got to give people a reason to tune in when you're going to lose to the Mets 9-3 after you lost to the Phillies 10-1 in the series finale the night before. So I took a lot of pride in that. And now that's something I really stress with my students.
Right. And let's talk about that, Glenn, because I think that makes sense to segue there. And by the way, along the way, before you became, I know you're adjunct faculty, have been adjunct faculty down there in Florida for quite a while. Were there some earlier signs, maybe guest visits, or how did your desire to sow into the next generation, how did that start to evolve?
From the time I was working in Rochester, just a few years out of college, I always had what a lot of high school and college students thought was a pretty cool job. So I always had a lot of people reaching out to me. How do I get my foot in the door? Can you offer advice? Will you listen to my tape? Can you offer some feedback? So I did a lot of that stuff over the years. Then you start getting invited to speak on college campuses or at high schools or career days at elementary and middle schools. And I loved doing that stuff. I tell people all the time, you got to reach out to people you respect in the industry. Some of them are going to get back to you. Some of them might not. But if one or two get back to you, it can be useful and beneficial for you. I was one of those people who got back to people, and I loved doing that. So like a lot of the world in 2020 during COVID, when we all kind of sat down and reassessed our lives and what we're doing here, I began to think about, what do I want my next chapter to look like? I ominously gave you a ... before when I said something about how much I enjoyed most of my years with the Marlins. The Marlins were sold in 2018. And my final years with the Marlins under different ownership were not nearly as enjoyable for a lot of reasons, including them getting rid of a lot of the people who really made going to work every day enjoyable for me. And eventually, after surviving for 5 years, I was one of those people who was removed because they could bring somebody in and pay that person a fraction of what they were paying me. I was the fourth of 4 English language broadcasters to be let go over the span of, I guess, about 5 years or whatever the number of years was. But before that happened, even I had in 2020 been thinking, hey, what is my next chapter? And I decided, you know what, I really want to teach. And so in 2020 during COVID, I reached out to several local universities, introduced myself, talked about my background, and asked if anybody would be interested in bringing me on board. And I got a couple of really positive messages back from people, but I really hit it off with the woman who at the time was the director of the School of Communications and Multimedia Studies at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida. And she offered me the opportunity to come on board as an adjunct professor and teach a sports broadcasting class, which I did. And I loved it even more than I thought I would when I decided I wanted this to be my next chapter. I loved the connection with the students. I loved students coming to me for help and advice, whether it was with resumes or cover letters or tapes or just to talk about life or whatever. As somebody who has 3 children, or currently between the ages of 17 and 25, I've felt for several years like I relate to college students pretty well. And it was great, and it was incredibly rewarding. And as time went on, my opportunities at Florida Atlantic blossomed. Then the University of Florida got into the mix, and for the last year, I was teaching 2 courses a semester at FAU and 2 courses at the University of Florida. So I had a full-time load teaching 4 classes, but I was part-time at 2 different places. And in the last year or two, I've been thinking, hey, it would really be nice to be full-time in one place. And now moving forward, that opportunity's come my way.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue, and you're trained in these transitions, and so this was great news for me to hear. A couple of weeks ago, you let me know this new development. So, talk about what's coming up for you next in your career.
Moving back to the Midwest, I'm headed up to Milwaukee, which a lot of people don't believe me, but I swear this is true. Always one of my favorite cities to visit, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Through all my years, 26 years in the major leagues, always one of my favorite stops for a lot of reasons. The passionate fan base that the Brewers have, the dining in downtown Milwaukee, just downtown Milwaukee being a great city, just the right size, great energy to it. But beyond that, I'm joining the faculty at Marquette University in Milwaukee come this fall. They just this past year created a sports communication major in their College of Communication, and now they're going to bring me in to build a sports broadcasting curriculum and to teach that sports broadcasting curriculum and to start a student play-by-play program at Marquette where they've never had one before. So it's a terrific opportunity. It's funny, I talked about going back to 1990, starting out in Rochester as an intern, unpaid, and just grinding and making mascot appearances, doing whatever I had to do to try to build my brand and to try to grow things and try to take that next step. And that's really, in retrospect, what my time at FAU and UF was like. That was like an internship for me where every day I had to prove myself because I thought there might be a chance to go to the big leagues coming out of this.
Yeah.
And it might be at FAU and it might be at UF. It turns out it's at Marquette. And I'm really excited to continue to grind and push everybody as hard as I was during my intern years as a full-time faculty member at Marquette beginning in the fall.
Nice. And have you had to dress up as a mascot at any point in the last few years?
Not since I left Rochester. No. I'll show you if you want, by the way.
So that is nothing that you and I have in common. Yeah. Let's do a little show and tell.
This is R.W. Homer. That's me on the field in Rochester in 1990. R.W. Homer, the Red Wings mascot. Excellent. Now, in this picture, R.W. is not wearing the big red clown shoes that he normally wore. For some reason, I think I just had the Reeboks on that day. But you see the baseball pants, the stirrup socks, the big baseball. You can see out of the hat where the R is on the front of the hat. That's where I would see. But the thing with R.W. Homer and these giant red clown shoes was that we played at that time in the old ballpark in Rochester, Silver Stadium, that had these huge ramps at the very top to get down to the bottom of the stadium. And kids realized if you knocked R.W. Homer off his feet right at the top of one of those ramps, he would not come to a stop until he hit the chain link fence all the way down at the bottom. And so I spent a lot of that summer black and blue, but I wouldn't trade a second of it. And I look back on those years and even those mascot appearances quite fondly. And I show that picture to my students to this day. And I say, you want to get your foot in the door. You want to grind. You got to do whatever you're asked to do. No job is too big or too small. And don't worry about where you're going to be in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. You'll get there if you're the best you can possibly be doing what you're being asked to do today. And that might be making a mascot appearance or doing PR or selling advertising, flipping burgers or pulling the tarp, which we all did. And I wouldn't trade a minute of those years.
That's so cool. And so So in terms of getting this program up and running at Marquette, what's the template for that? I know Jay Adande, who we went to college with. He got the Northwestern Masters. I think it's for Masters, right? For in the sports
Sports
journalism realm.
journalism, right?
I'm not sure if he's been on your Rolodex to reach out to, but
I've talked to him a lot over the years.
how are you going about the process?
It's a very good question. I
Mm-hmm.
can't give you all my secrets because we're going to turn Marquette into a powerhouse in this realm over the course of the next several years, hopefully. But no, the idea is to create opportunities. And I'm an experiential I don't teach out of a textbook. I teach out of having lived this life, having been in the industry. And everything we talk about are based on lessons I've learned over the years doing this. And we get out in the real world and we do things. We call games and we do sideline reports and we do podcasts and we do sports talk radio and we do whatever it is that you might do, sports opinion pieces, things like that. Whatever you might do in the realm of broadcasting in 2026 and beyond, we do all these things. We get people out into the real world in front of a camera, in front of a microphone, and we do this stuff. And you get reps, you get better every time you do it. The great thing about doing college radio in my day was I could make so many mistakes and nobody was paying attention at that time. Each step you climb up the ladder, more and more people are paying attention. And now you get into a world where everybody can tweet you. If heaven forbid you ever misspeak on the radio or on TV, you're going to hear about it from 10 million people on Twitter within 30 seconds. So that's the beauty of being in college.
Yeah.
You get opportunities, you get the chance to make mistakes and learn from them. And my big thing is it's not just about having a student radio station that's going to call games, but it's about having a chance to broadcast games on a student radio station and having someone with you every step of the way to tell you what you're doing great, to tell you what maybe you could do differently the next time. And that one-on-one critique, that relationship that I'm going to have with my students that I've had at UF and FAU in the past is what's really going to set this thing apart.
Very cool. And so what would you say would be like, at least for the first, is it semester system or quarters there at Marquette?
Run semesters, yes. Semesters.
Okay. So is there some kind of tangible numerical goal? Like, how do you know when you've succeeded, I guess? And it'll be a while, right? Because it's a process. And
it doesn't happen
you're
overnight.
starting from ground zero. So,
and in fact, I'm going to spend the fall semester just getting this broadcasting play-by-play program up and running to hopefully break it in the spring. We got to recruit people to do this stuff. I'm going to teach an intro to sports broadcasting class in the fall. And hopefully some of the people will come out of that class and start, we had WNUR at Northwestern and get involved and start calling games. Now, one of the challenges we're going to face at Marquette is Marquette plays Big East basketball, but does not have a football program. It doesn't play baseball or softball in the spring. So we're going to have to get creative on some of those things because really the big sports that most people are going to call and try to do professionally are often football, basketball, baseball, and softball. We've got basketball, men's and women's, and very high level, but we don't have football, baseball, or softball. So there's some other things we can do in the area that I'm looking into to get students opportunities and reps. And we also live in an era where because of COVID in 2020 and 2021, I didn't travel with my team. And you see a lot of broadcasters to this day calling games remotely. So if I ask a student to broadcast a game off of his or her TV or laptop, that's not completely unheard of in 2026. You can get your experience doing that even. And yes, there's a lot to be said for being in the building and having the atmosphere and having access. But to get your initial reps, to begin getting experience, we can do stuff like that as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I know I covered the White Sox a little bit in 2021 at the end of the season. And I remember reaching out to you before I went into the press box for the first time at that location in 21 or about 20 years. I'd been there before for Sports Illustrated for Kids. And I don't know if you recall this, Glenn. Do you remember what my big burning question was that you gave me counsel on that day?
I don't.
It was the Cubs White Sox, and it was August 20-ish, and it was really, really hot. And I said, Glenn, what do you think? Would it be appropriate? Could I get away with wearing shorts?
Oh.
And he said, you probably should. The bottom line was wear pants. There might be some more veteran people who've been there a lot. They could do that, but for new guys showing up,
Right.
Anyway, so what's funny is about that is when I got there, got my press pass for the box. It was a photo from 20 years earlier that they still had somehow in their system when I was in there for SI for Kids. Crazy. So
Wow, that's funny.
anyway, so in all that span, so you had thousands and thousands of reps like this. And so what would you say for students who are considering going to Marquette or anywhere else, considering a career in broadcasting? Let's say they're 12 years old or 15 years old. What are some things now that they can be doing? And by the way, how important is it for them to know how to write? I want to drop that in there. So maybe you can address that first.
I love that question. And that's a very thoughtful question to ask. To me, my background being in writing at Medill, studying print journalism, there were very few broadcasting classes. There were 2 broadcasting classes at Medill when we were there, and I took them both my senior year. There was a broadcast news writing class and a broadcast news reporting class, and it was preparing you to work on a local news television show. It had nothing to do with sports, but what I tell students today from a young age is whatever you can do in school, you got to get involved. If you have a student radio station, student TV station, do the morning announcements. You've got to begin. You got to get in front of the camera. You've got to get in front of the microphone. You've got to start getting comfortable. You've got to start getting reps, even at that level. In the meantime, if you want to get into sports, learn everything you possibly can about every sport you possibly can. One of my messages is, look, I was a baseball guy. Baseball is my thing. I was a sports fan, but I never wanted to work in anything other than baseball. And I lived my life working in baseball professionally. I had chances as the years went on to do some football and basketball that I turned down because doing baseball for 162, I was very selfish about my off season, and I wanted to be more present as a father and as a husband in the off season. But you got to get as much experience doing as many different sports as possible. Think about all the college networks now, and you may not go to the Big Ten network and do football right off the bat or do basketball right off the bat, but they've got people doing volleyball and soccer and track and field, and there's fencing, and I mean, you name it, lacrosse, certainly field hockey. There are opportunities. You got to learn those sports. You got to do those sports. You got to do everything you possibly can, get as much experience as possible. And when you get to the point where you feel as though, okay, I've begun to develop a little bit of a style, I feel pretty good about what I'm doing, then, and I'm not saying you do this as a 14-year-old, I'm not saying you do this as a freshman or maybe even a sophomore in college, but when you've got more reps under your belt and you have a tape that you feel pretty good about, then you should start reaching out to people in the industry who you respect and asking those people for feedback. And as I said earlier, not all of them are going to get back to you. Some of them will, not all of them will, but those who do will give you valuable feedback. And then all of a sudden you're on somebody's radar also. And one of the things that you find is so many of these jobs get filled before anybody even knows that they're open. And so when you start getting on people's radar and a AA broadcaster asks a major league broadcaster, hey, we're looking to hire a number 2 guy for next season. Do you know anybody? Well, actually, I got an email recently and listened to some stuff from this student at Marquette who I think is terrific. You ought to give this guy a call. And jobs get filled like that all the time. So much of it's about relationships and building those relationships.
Oh, yeah.
But you got to get started. You got to get going.
Absolutely. Yeah, be willing to fail, right? To stumble and stutter and mess up.
It's a lot harder than people think. It's a lot harder to do.
Yeah, the vulnerability.
All of it. I'm just calling a game.
Be willing to fail.
Because you watch Jim Nantz on a Sunday afternoon or watch Al Michaels or you watch Joe Buck, and they're so smooth and they're so perfect. They always have the right words. They always know what to say. It's not that easy because people don't see the preparation that goes into that. They don't see how long these guys have been doing it to get to that point. And it's funny, what I find with a lot of my students is they've always watched games on TV, so they think they can do the job. Until you actually sit down in front of a microphone, you have no idea what doing that job looks like. And you're not really thinking about the description that you have on radio that we all take for granted, or the way a play-by-play broadcaster has that chemistry with a color analyst. You don't think about those things until you're actually put in that position. And it's a lot harder than people think.
Oh, yeah. Well, and there's a difference, obviously, between radio and TV.
Sure.
Right? Radio, you need to be the eyes for everybody. TV, it's more sparing, right? They can just let the visuals and then so anyhow. So here I was just going to mention too. A few nights ago, I was watching the Pirates versus Yankees, Game 7, 1960 World Series.
Okay.
And so, Peacock has these old archived things, and I'm not sure if you've ever seen that broadcast, Clint. Have you seen that particular game?
I've never watched it start to finish. I know I've seen clips, but no. And I know there's the botched call at the end of the game also on the Mazeroski home run.
There were at least two.
Right, there were a couple of mistakes. The pitcher, right, Art Ditmar throws, and the score was given incorrectly at the end of that by Chuck Thompson, legendary broadcaster, longtime voice of the Orioles.
Oh, interesting. Well, this was Mel Allen.
Okay, so you're listening to Yankees broadcast
that I saw. Yeah. Two bucks. Yeah. For some reason, he came in the middle of the game, so maybe they spliced for this particular. It's on Peacock right now. But Yogi Berra's 3-run home run that put the Yankees ahead in the middle of the game, he initially called that a foul ball because he was basing it on Roberto Clemente in right field, not really moving, as if that said anything. Roberto, that was his yard. He knew it was going out. He wasn't going to be able to do anything about it. And so he attributed his lack of going after it to be, it must be a foul ball, which the logic doesn't add up. So that's one thing. And then later on, that amazing play where Mickey Mantle dives back into first base after the forced out at first base on a line drive. Right. And Mickey, rather than trying to get to second base, because he wasn't sure it was going to be caught, he jumps back in, avoids the tag. And in the process, the guy on third base who had just gone into pinch run, that very pitch, had just gone into pinch run for Dale Long, he scores. But initially, Mel Allen says, bases loaded. And he goes, oh, no, this game is tied. And so, again, I'm not here to slam Mel Allen, just to say it's hard. And he's one of the most famous and most iconic voices, which that does segue. And I know we're nearing the end of our time because I know that you have a life and we want to stay under an hour if we can. But that segues to stuff yet. I know. I'm not even going to talk about AI, which we can talk about that another time.
Yeah, that might be taking a lot of broadcasters' jobs.
Your extra innings column, where. Okay, well let's get to that. Maybe that could be a final thing with maybe a hopeful note afterwards somehow. But your column, extra innings, which I'm really enjoying. You're writing these amazing pieces that, as a lifelong baseball nut, I'm learning things every column. Sometimes I'm learning things in their entirety. So thank you for your extra innings Substack, which is available for anyone to subscribe to.
For you to say that means a lot, and I say this incredibly sincerely, Matt, because I know the extent of your baseball passion and knowledge and the history, especially, that you and I share that. So I know a lot of the stories I tell, I figure there's going to be 10 or 20% of people who are going to know this story. A lot of people will not. But when you tell me you didn't know something, that surprises me, and it makes me feel good in a way that I'm really providing a service here. Because if you didn't know it, nobody reading this stuff knows it.
Probably. Well, yeah, I'm a bit of a fanatic, and I've done a lot of reading. In fact, I just recommended a book to you a couple of days ago, a terrific book by a gentleman on the 1948 Indians and their World Series run. And so, called Our Team. And so Luke begins with an A, his last name, but any event. So those columns, tell me about that. Like, amidst all that you're doing, preparing with your new engagement with Marquette, how do you find the time? How do you choose the topic? And what has that meant for you to be digging in so deeply like this and then writing it instead of being a broadcaster about it?
It's for one thing, I really love to write, and I haven't written that much over the years. So I enjoy flexing that writing muscle a little bit. I love baseball, but I love baseball history more than I love baseball present, if that makes sense. And having spent 31 years in the game and 26 years in the big leagues, and having lived and breathed it 24/7 for all those years, it surprises a lot of people to hear that I've kind of withdrawn from modern Major League Baseball to a certain extent. I really don't follow it on a day-to-day basis. There are a couple of podcasts I listen to that enable me to have kind of a 30,000-foot view of what's happening in the big leagues today. So I could give you an idea of who's in first place and who's been a big disappointment so far, but I couldn't tell you the White Sox starting rotation. Like, at one time I could do all that stuff, certainly, with my eyes closed and both hands tied behind my back. So, but I love baseball history, and that will never change. And I love the baseball that we grew up with in the 1970s and 1980s. I just saw one of the great Twitter accounts, the throwback to the 80s accounts, posted something a couple of days ago. It was a picture of 4 major leaguers in different uniforms, obviously at an all-star game in the 1980s. And who can identify these 4 players? And I immediately knew those 4 players: Bo Diaz, Tony Armas, Manny Trio, and I'm trying to remember who the 4th was. For the life, I can't remember but there were 4 guys like that weren't even necessarily household names. Yeah. But I can identify those 4 guys. Sure. I might not be able to identify 4 guys at the All-Star game this year. I can even tell you it was played at the 1981 All-Star game in Cleveland right after the strike. I could tell from the picture. But so I'm still so connected to the history of the game. I want to write about the history of the game, but I want to write different things about the history of the game. So that's where Extra Innings came about. It's a chance to tell baseball stories, as I say, beyond the box score, stories that maybe people haven't heard before. Some of them are more recent than others. Some of them go way back. I led off with the story of Ray Caldwell, who was a pitcher in 1919. Think about this. In an era where you so rarely see a complete game today, this guy was on the mound for the Cleveland Indians, was struck by lightning on the pitcher's mound in the middle of a game, picked himself up, dusted himself off, and finished the game, threw a complete game that afternoon. Those are the kind of stories I'm looking for in this. And, some of them are things people know about. The All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. Everybody has seen the movie A League of Their Own, but I wrote a couple of pieces related to that league and some stories people don't know about that league. A lot of this stuff comes from preparation I have in my laptop, stuff I've put together over the decades. Some of it I used on broadcasts, some I never got to. Some of it is connected to things happening in the game today. Something might happen that I hear about or see, and I say, you know what, that reminded me of something. I'm going to tell this story now. So, for example, tomorrow, I'd written a piece recently about obviously the lack of offense in Major League Baseball these days, how pitchers have taken over and how the Major League average batting average is 239, which has only been – there's only been one season in history where it was lower than it is this year. It's so hard to hit in Major League Baseball. So I wrote that a week or two ago, and I was thinking about Tony Gwynn recently, and I was thinking about Tony Gwynn's 394 season in 1994 that was cut short by the baseball strike. So my piece tomorrow is recounting that season in the context of that may legitimately be the last time any major leaguer makes a run at 400, which is really sad if you think about it. The excitement of that. And we had Rod Carew and George Brett when we were growing up, Tony Gwynn in 94. It may never happen again. And so that was the context where I told a historic story in the context of what's happening in baseball today. I try to connect those dots. And the idea is to tell most people things that they will find interesting, that maybe they didn't know about the history of Major League Baseball.
Yeah, very good. Well, Glenn, we truly could go on for another hour or two. And maybe I think what that means is we have to save it for the next time. So in the meantime, let me just ask you, where can people find you? How can they reach out to you if they want to get counsel? Do you have a Marquette email address yet? What's that info? And I'll make sure I put this in the notes.
No, the easiest way to get me, if you want to see my Substack, it's Extra Innings MLB. I think it's. Let me make sure on this actually as I say that. Extra Innings is the name of the Substack. I'm trying to figure out what the URL is. It's Extra Innings MLB. Yes, .substack.com. Okay. I have a website, GlennGeffner.com. Geffner.com. You can learn more about what I'm up to, some of the different things I've got going. I do one-on-one play-by-play coaching via Zoom with high school and college students from across the country. Did I just lose you, Matt, or are you still there?
I'm still here. It was just lagging
Okay.
a little bit, but I
Okay,
can
because all
still
of a
see you
sudden
and hear you.
I can't see you right now. But if you can hear me, but my website, glengeffner.com, you can go there. And now I can see you again. And there's a way to contact me through the
Okay.
website. I'm on Twitter at Glenn Geffner. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm all over the place. But yeah, would love to hear from people who are passionate about baseball or sports broadcasting. And if we can help in any way, people know where to find us.
Fantastic. Well, hey, it's been great to catch up with you, Rumi, old Rumi.
Good stuff.
And so until the next time, I will, in fact, let's do this. How would you sign off on games? What would be your parting words to folks? That might be a fun, it's probably like some people can say, things from their upbringing.
Yeah, no, I didn't really have a thing where I would say good night. You know what I would do as signing off the post game show. It would be tonight's final score one final time. The Phillies 12 and the Marlins 1. We're back with you tomorrow night at 7:10 for game 2 of the series on the Marlins Radio Network, whatever it was. But yeah, I can't give you our final score one final time because we don't have a score for what we did today. But it would have been a victory. I know that for sure.
I like that. For sure. Well, and I
Nothing
appreciate
too crazy.
you're squeezing in one last piece of information and value there. So anyway, great stuff talking to you, Glenn. Look forward to seeing you in person when you come up towards this neck of the woods. And so
Count on it.
meantime, have a good night, and we'll see you the next time. All right.
This was fun. Thanks, Matt.